The pen felt heavier than it should, a sliver of cheap plastic containing enough ink to sever a life. My life, or at least the life I'd been living for the past 5 years. From my perch on the wobbly stool in my third-floor walk-up in Greyhaven, New Jersey, the view was of brick walls and fire escapes weeping rust-colored tears. It was a fitting backdrop for the document spread across my small, scarred kitchen table. Petition for dissolution of marriage, Greer, Adam C. versus Valen, Nora A. It sounded so clinical, so sterile, like a lab report for a failed experiment. Adam was a criminal attorney, a man who built his career on finding the clean lines in messy lives. He wore tailored suits that never wrinkled and a smile that never quite reached his eyes. To the world, he was pristine. In the quiet, carpeted tomb of our suburban home, he was a master of the slow chill, an architect of doubt. He could make you question the very ground beneath your feet with a single, perfectly calibrated phrase. Are you sure you remember it that way? Nora, you've been so emotional lately. My signature was the last thing needed. His was already there, a sharp, arrogant slash of black ink at the bottom of the page. I stared at the empty line beneath it. Nora A. Valen, soon to be just Nora Valen again. The A stood for Anne, after my grandmother, a woman who knew the weight of her own name. I'd lost that weight somewhere along the way. The scratch of the ballpoint pen against the thick, creamy paper was a grating sound, like metal scraping against tooth enamel. I pressed down hard, carving my name back into existence. Each curve and line was a reclamation. With a final flourish of then, a shudder went through me, not of sorrow, but of a deep, cellular release, like a muscle unclenching after a 5-year cramp. It was done. On the counter, next to a single, browning apple, lay the envelope it had come in, white, crisp, with the embossed seal of the Merrow County Civil Court, a formal, final punctuation mark. My gaze drifted from the envelope to the junk drawer, which was slightly ajar. I knew what was inside, nestled between a book of matches from a restaurant we'd never visit again and a spare set of keys to a life I no longer wanted. I pulled the drawer open. The thin plastic stick was there, its little window holding the ghost of a line. I'd torn the package open this morning, my hands trembling, not with hope or fear, but with a grim need for certainty. The result was an answer so faint it was almost a question. A pale, hesitant mark that could have been a shadow, a trick of the light. It was enough. For a dizzying moment, I saw the path that line represented, a chain, forged not of love but of obligation, a way to bind him, to make the clean lines of his life messy for once. It would be a righteous, bitter victory, but it would also be another cage. 5 years with Adam had taught me that some cages are built of concern, some of promises, and the most dangerous of all are built of shared secrets. This would be the ultimate secret, the one that would ensure I was never truly free. He would call it our responsibility, our duty, and I would hear the click of the lock. My freedom was a newborn thing, still wet and fragile. It was more precious than any revenge. I picked up the plastic test, the faint line a whisper of a life I was choosing not to live, and with a sharp twist, snapped it in two. Then I tore the pieces apart, shredding the plastic and the small strip of paper inside until it was nothing but a pile of white confetti in the palm of my hand. This wasn't about him. This was about me, about choosing safety and sanity after years of being told my own mind was an unreliable narrator. I washed the pieces down the sink and watched them disappear into the gurgling darkness of the drain. My phone felt cold in my hand. I dialed my cousin's number. Rhea Calder worked as an accountant for some faceless entity called the North Atlantic Commerce Bureau. She lived in a world of spreadsheets and verifiable data, a world I envied. She answered on the second ring. "Well, it's done," I said, my voice raspy. I signed. There was a pause on the other end, filled only with the faint, rhythmic click of a keyboard. Rhea wasn't one for platitudes. "Good," she said finally. "Now get out of that apartment before you suffocate. Go to the undertrack market. Buy something useless. Get air in your lungs. The line went dead. That was Rhea. Practical, prescriptive, and probably right. The undertrack was a chaotic slash of light and sound carved into the space beneath the abandoned elevated train line. The air was thick with the smells of fried dough, damp concrete, and cheap perfume. Neon signs, their paint peeling like sunburnt skin, flickered erratically, casting the crowds in shades of electric blue and feverish pink. A tinny synth track bled from a dozen different speakers, creating a disorienting, low-budget symphony. It was the perfect place to feel anonymous. I wore an old black wool dress, shapeless and soft from years of wear. It wasn't an act of seduction, it was an act of remembrance, a reminder that the body underneath was mine, that its curves and edges belonged to me and me alone, around my neck. I'd fastened the one thing I still trusted implicitly, my grandmother's halcyon stopwatch pendant. It was silver. Its face yellowed with age, its hands frozen at 11:57. It didn't tell time. It held it, a fixed point in a spinning world. The bare skin on my left ring finger felt strange, vulnerable. A man with a cheap leather jacket and stale beer on his breath noticed it immediately. He saw the pale, untanned circle of skin where my wedding band used to be and took it as an invitation. Lost something, he slurred, leaning a little too close. I didn't answer. I just melted back into the river of people. My heart thumping a dull, annoyed rhythm, I ducked into the alcove of a stall selling salted lemonade in tall, sweating glasses. The vendor, a woman with tired eyes and a kind smile, handed me one without a word. The mix of sharp citrus and salt was a shock to my system. I took a long drink, the cold liquid burning a trail down my throat, and realized I'd forgotten what it felt like to be properly intoxicated by anything other than Adam's carefully constructed reality. "I told you to get air, not get hit on." Rhea appeared at my elbow, a plastic cup of her own in hand. She looked, as always, like she was on her way to a very serious meeting, even here. Her blazer was sharp, her expression sharper. "He saw the ghost of the ring," I said, shrugging. "Let him. Ghosts can't hurt you." She took a sip of her drink, her eyes scanning the crowd. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled something out. It was a small, black card, the size of a business card, but made of a heavy, matte plastic. It was completely blank. No name, no logo, no number. She pressed it into my palm. My fingers closed around its cool, smooth edges. "The Vesper Room," she said, her voice low. "Dock 12. You need to learn how to say no in the safety of amber light." I stared at the black rectangle. It felt heavy, dense with unspoken meaning. What is this? Rhea. It's a place, a quiet place, for people who need to have conversations without being overheard. She looked me straight in the eye. "You've spent 5 years saying yes when you meant no. Go there, order a drink, and when someone talks to you, practice." I almost gave it back. A deep, primal instinct screamed that the card felt unclean, that the place it represented was tangled in something I didn't want to touch. Dock 12 was the old part of town, the part of the waterfront that polite society had forgotten. But I didn't give it back. I slipped it into the pocket of my dress. After 5 years of being trapped in the role of the good, supportive wife, of having my choices subtly curated for me, this small, dangerous-feeling card was a door I hadn't been shown. It was an escape hatch, even if only a psychological one. I held on to it. Back in the quiet of my apartment, the air was still and cold. The first thing I did was go to my jewelry box, a simple wooden thing Adam had called charming in a tone that meant cheap. I took out my wedding band, a simple, elegant platinum ring. It had felt like a shackle for so long. I dropped it into the box and closed the lid. The click was soft, but it echoed in the silence like a gunshot. As I stood there, a sudden gust of wind rattled the window pane. It swept through the thin curtains, carrying the cold, damp smell of the Mersey River and the promise of a storm. The city lights flickered for a moment, and a chill that had nothing to do with the weather snaked down my spine. It was a premonition, a signal from the world that the calm wouldn't last. I looked at my reflection in the dark glass of the window. A woman I barely recognized stood there, her face pale, her eyes wide. I whispered a vow to her, to myself, a new contract, written on the air. From now on, no one signs for my life but me. That night, before I fell into a restless sleep, I found an old notebook and a pen. On the first clean page, under the faint blue lines, I wrote just 7 words, a final confirmation to myself that the day had been real, that the signature was binding, that the future was, for the first time in a long time, unwritten. Divorce is final. Tomorrow. I'll take a deep breath. 5 years. It turns out that's how long it takes to wash a man out of your system. It takes 5 years. 3,000 miles of asphalt and a complete submersion into a new life. The Nora Valin who designed sterile, minimalist living rooms for people with more money than taste was gone. She'd been shed somewhere in the Nevada desert, left behind at a gas station alongside an empty coffee cup and a box of memories I no longer needed to carry. I was a salvage diver now, working freelance out of Arclight Bay, California. The contracts came from insurance companies trying to verify claims and, more often, from yacht owners who'd had unfortunate accidents they'd rather not explain on an official form. Life was no longer smooth and carpeted. It was choppy, unpredictable, and entirely my own. My home was a converted loft above the Blue Lantern boatyard. It was one big room that smelled perpetually of salt, diesel, and the turpentine and cedar scent of boat building. My mornings started with black coffee and the screech of gulls. My evenings ended with the rhythmic hiss of a compressor and the clang of metal on metal from the yard below. It was a loud, messy, tangible life. I loved it. My partner was Deacon Wu, a former Coast Guard rescue swimmer with a face that looked like it had been carved from driftwood and eyes that had seen too many things go wrong at sea. He spoke in clipped, efficient sentences. We had 2 rules: never dive alone, and never ask about the past. We measured our trust in PSC and water depth, and that was enough. On a Tuesday night, the fog rolling in thick and heavy off the Pacific, a courier from a company called Horizon Express delivered a package. It was a padded envelope, surprisingly heavy, with no return address. Just my name, Nora Valin, printed in stark block letters. Inside was a single action camera, the kind you mount on a helmet, and a folded piece of paper. The note was typed, "If you're the woman who dared to tear up a result, you'll dare to open this video." A cold shock, sharp and electric, went through me. The words were a key. Unlocking a room in my memory, I kept bolted shut. The cheap apartment in Greyhaven, the snapped piece of plastic. An act of private desperation and self-preservation that no one in the world could possibly know about. Deacon was cleaning a regulator at our shared workbench, his movements precise. "Junk mail?" he asked without looking up. "I don't know what it is," I said, my voice tight. I plugged the camera's memory card into my laptop. My hands felt unsteady. The file was a single MP4. I clicked play. The footage was chaotic, shot from a low, unstable angle. Darkness, the roar of wind and crashing waves. It was clearly filmed on the deck of a boat in a violent storm. The camera panned wildly, catching glimpses of slick, dark water and rain lashing across the lens. Then the view tilted down. 2 men were struggling with a heavy, dark object near the railing, a mid-sized safe. As a massive wave crashed over the side, they lost their grip. The safe slid across the deck, hit the railing with a sickening crunch of metal on fiberglass, and tipped over the edge into the churning black water. The camera operator rushed to the side, pointing the lens down into the sea. The safe was a dark shape sinking fast, for just a second, before it was swallowed by the depths. The boat's deck lights caught a small, stenciled symbol on its side. It was a stylized flower, a morning glory, its trumpet-like bloom rendered in what looked like faded white paint. The video ended. My breath caught in my throat. The morning glory. I scrambled for the small lockbox where I kept my important documents. At the very bottom, beneath my birth certificate and the deed to my truck, was the small, black, featureless card Rhea had given me 5 years ago. I'd never thrown it away. I hadn't known why, until now. I ran my thumb over its smooth, matte surface. In the right light, if you tilted it just so, you could see the faintest ghost of an image pressed into the plastic. It was a morning glory. "What is it?" Deacon's voice cut through my thoughts. I replayed the last few seconds of the video, freezing the frame on the symbol, a job. I pulled up the maritime charts for Arclight Bay on my second monitor. The video file had metadata, GPS coordinates. It went down in the outer channel, deep but manageable. Deacon came over, wiping his hands on a rag. He looked from the symbol on the screen to the coordinates. Anonymous client, cryptic note. Dropping a safe in a storm, smells bad. Nora, smells like the kind of trouble that doesn't just end when you surface. "I know," I said, already plotting the dive profile, "but I have to know who sent this, and why." He just nodded slowly, his expression grim, depth and pressure, then nothing else. 3,000 miles away, in a walnut-paneled office overlooking the gray, choppy waters of Northport's industrial harbor, Silas Caravello did not look at the view. His attention was on the secure phone that had just vibrated, once, on the polished surface of his desk. He picked it up. There was no caller ID. There never was on this line. "Speak." His voice was calm, a low baritone that held a natural, unforced authority. The voice on the other end was female and distorted by software into a robotic, toneless rasp. The package was delivered. The safe that went overboard from the Astor Links in Arclight Bay contains a copy of the Briar Ledger. Silas felt a familiar tightening in his chest, the cold grip of a past that refused to stay buried. The Briar Ledger, a ghost story, a myth whispered among the old guard, a detailed accounting of every transaction, every shipment, and every sin his father's organization had committed for 2 decades. "The ledger could destroy your empire, Mr. Caravello," the robotic voice continued, "or it could cleanse it of the bloodstains your father left behind. The choice depends on who opens it. Only one person can find it now, a woman who dared to tear up a result." The line clicked dead. Silas placed the phone back on the desk, his movements deliberate. He swiveled in his leather chair to face the terminal behind him. He typed a few commands into a proprietary system his people called the Vesper Risk Prism. It was a powerful analytical tool that cross-referenced data streams, looking for patterns the human eye would miss. He entered the key phrases Arclight Bay, Astor Links, and the strange, poetic line, "Woman who dared to tear up a result." The system churned for less than 10 seconds. A single file was flagged, compiled from public records and whispered digital chatter. A name appeared on the screen, Nora Valen. He read the file. A designer from the East Coast, divorced 5 years ago from a well-connected attorney in Greyhaven, New Jersey. A quiet but legally contentious separation. Then she'd vanished from that life, only to resurface a year later in California as a freelance salvage diver. The prism highlighted the keywords from the court records Adam Greer had accused her of being emotionally unstable and prone to making rash, destructive decisions for attention, standard tactics for a lawyer in a bitter divorce. But buried in the sealed testimony was a mention of a suspected pregnancy she had allegedly terminated without discussion, a result torn up. It was a long shot, but it was the only shot he had. Silas needed that ledger. 10 years ago, a brutal internal purge had consolidated his father's power, a series of violent events that had left a stain on the Caravello name that even he couldn't wash away. He was suspected of orchestrating it. The ledger, he believed, held the proof that he hadn't. It contained the names of the true architects, the ones who had manipulated his father. It was his only path to legitimacy, his only chance to pivot Caravello Holdings from a shadowy syndicate into the clean, global logistics firm he envisioned. But this was delicate. Sending his own men in heavy-handed would draw too much attention. The bay would be crawling with federal agents before they even got their feet wet. It required a softer touch. If this Nora Valen was the key, he had to get to her first. He had to be the one to turn the lock. He picked up another phone, this one a direct line to his second-in-command, Cassio. Book me a flight to San Francisco and a suite at the Tidebone Hotel in Arclight Bay, indefinite stay. Business, Cassio asked. Maritime acquisitions. Silas replied smoothly. I'm going fishing. At the same moment, Silas was booking his flight. Rhea Calder stared at a different screen, this one in a sterile, government-issue cubicle in Washington, D.C. She was no longer just an accountant. She was a senior financial investigator for the Interstate Integrity Commission, the IIC. An alert had just flashed in the corner of her monitor, flagged from an encrypted tip line. The keywords were what caught her eye. Briar Ledger, Vesper Syndicate, Arclight Bay. Her team had been trying to get a handle on the Vesper Syndicate for years. They were ghosts, a logistics and shipping empire that was rumored to have its hands in everything that moved on the eastern seaboard, but they were insulated by layers of legitimate business fronts. The ledger was their holy grail, the one piece of evidence that could untangle the entire web. She ran a cross-reference search, linking the location to known associates and assets in the area. The system spat out a handful of shell corporations, offshore bank accounts, and one name, a single, improbable name linked to a private investigator's report from 5 years ago, filed during a background check. Her heart skipped a beat. On the screen, blinking under the IIC's stark institutional font, was the name of her cousin. Nora Valen. The Pacific at night is a different beast. It's not the cheerful, sun-drenched expanse of the daytime. It's a cold, black universe that swallows light and sound. The water clamped around my body, the pressure a constant, heavy hand on the back of my neck, down here. The only sounds were the slow, rhythmic hiss of my own breathing through the regulator and the frantic drumming of my heart. I followed the coordinates from the video's metadata, my dive light cutting a nervous, trembling cone through the murky darkness. Deacon was up top in the Triton, our small, battered workboat, my lifeline, a thin, strong rope snaked up to him, my only physical connection to the world of air and noise. On the pier a quarter-mile away, a taco truck was still serving a few late-night stragglers. The faint, tinny strains of a ranchera ballad drifted over the water, a surreal soundtrack to my descent into the cold, silent depths. And then I saw it. It was resting on a sandy patch between two rocky outcrops, looking smaller and more mundane than I'd expected, a dark metal box, already being colonized by the sea. I ran a gloved hand over its surface, feeling the rough texture of marine growth beginning to take hold. The stenciled morning glory was still visible, a pale ghost in the beam of my light. I checked the handle and the combination dial. The dial was frozen solid with grit and impact damage. There would be no cracking this open on the spot. I signaled to Deacon with 3 sharp tugs on the line. Objective found. He tugged back twice. Acknowledged. I was attaching the harness to the safe when a new sound cut through the water. A low, throbbing hum. It wasn't the distant chug of a freighter in the shipping lanes. This was close. Too close. I killed my light and pressed myself into the shadow of a large rock formation. Above me, a dark shape blotted out the faint starlight filtering down from the surface. A motorboat, running without lights. My blood went cold. They weren't just watching, they were actively searching. A small, dark object dropped from the boat and sank slowly, dangling from a thin wire. It looked like a fishing lure. It wasn't. A low-frequency pulse hit me, a wave of pure sound that vibrated through my bones. It didn't hurt, not in the sharp way a blow would. It was worse. My equilibrium vanished, the world tilted and spun, my ears filled with a high-pitched, disorienting whine. Nausea rose in my throat. It was a sonic stunner, a way to incapacitate a diver without leaving a mark. I squeezed my eyes shut, fighting the vertigo, my gloved hands gripping the rock to keep from floating away. Helpless. The pulse stopped. In the ringing silence of my own head, I knew they would be waiting for me to surface, dazed and vulnerable. My original plan, a slow, careful lift, was garbage. I had to change the game. My fingers, clumsy from the sonic blast, fumbled for the knife strapped to my calf. With a saw-like motion, I sliced through my own lifeline to the Triton. I was untethered, a ghost. I pulled the compressed air canister from my lift bag, clipped it to the safe's harness, and cracked the valve. A torrent of bubbles exploded upwards, a silver curtain in the darkness. The bag inflated with a deep whoomp, a balloon of bright yellow nylon straining to reach the sky. The safe, freed from the ocean floor, began its rapid, uncontrolled ascent. I wouldn't be with it. It was the prize, and I was just the delivery service. I grabbed a small, waterproof buoy from my belt, its reflector a brilliant turquoise, and clipped it to the harness as it floated past, a beacon. Let them follow the beacon. I stayed low, using the rock formations for cover, and began a slow, horizontal swim away from the target, conserving my air, my head still throbbing with a dull, metallic ache. When I finally surfaced, it was 100 yards from where I went in, behind the rotting pylons of the old cannery pier. The dark motorboat was circling the newly surfaced yellow lift bag, their searchlights now on, cutting white scars across the black water. Deacon had already pulled the Triton away, a smart move. No sense in him getting caught in the net. I clung to a pylon, catching my breath, the cold night air a balm on my face, and that's when I saw him. He wasn't on the boat. He was on the main pier, standing under a lamp that couldn't decide if it wanted to cast a yellow light or a gray one. He wore a dark leather jacket that seemed to absorb the weak light around it. He wasn't looking at the boat or the commotion on the water. He was looking directly at me. He couldn't possibly see me in the deep shadows of the pier, but I felt his gaze like a change in water pressure. It was unnervingly calm, impossibly focused. His eyes were like a depth gauge, not loud, not threatening, just accurate, measuring, assessing. I slipped back into the water and swam, silent and low, towards the boatyard. By the time I climbed the ladder at the Blue Lantern dock, my teeth were chattering from the cold and adrenaline. Deacon was there, waiting. "You cut the line," he stated, handing me a thick towel. "We had company." I looked back across the water. The mystery man was gone from his spot under the light. Instead, he was at the all-night seafood stall near the taco truck, buying a paper cup of something hot. He was talking to the old man who ran the stall, his posture relaxed, casual, a tourist asking for directions. But his head was angled just slightly, his attention still fixed on the bay, on the area where my turquoise buoy now bobbed gently on the tide. I dried myself off, my mind racing. 10 minutes later, dressed in dry clothes, I walked over there, my heart a cold, heavy knot in my chest. I needed to get a closer look. I bought a bottle of water from the taco truck, my back to the seafood stall. I could hear his voice now. It was a smooth North American accent, but underneath it, there was a faint, almost imperceptible cadence, a ghost of an Italian inflection, flattened and worn smooth by years spent elsewhere. He turned as I walked away, and for a second, our eyes met. It was just a glance. A meaningless contact between two strangers at a late-night food stall, but his eyes held mine for a fraction of a second too long. And in that moment, I knew he wasn't a cop. He wasn't a federal agent. He was something else. My phone buzzed in my pocket, a text from a number I didn't recognize. "Don't open the safe. What's inside will make you a target. R.C. Rhea. It had to be. My hand started to shake. How did she know? How was she connected to this? Silas watched the woman walk away. Nora Valen. She was smaller than he'd expected, but she moved with a swimmer's economy of motion. There was a resilience in the set of her shoulders. Even now, when she must have been cold and terrified, he'd seen her cut her line. He'd seen her send the safe up as a decoy. He'd watched her surface in the shadows. She was smart. He turned back to the vendor. "Thanks for the coffee." He dropped a 50 on the counter and walked away, pulling out his phone. He dialed a single number. "Cassio," he said, his voice low. "The asset is in play. The woman is competent. Our friends in the other boat were clumsy. I want them identified, but not engaged. No bloodshed in Arclight. Do you understand? This place stays quiet. Just observe. Track her. Track the buoy. I want to know where she takes it." He hung up. "We need to get it out of the water before they do," I told Deacon, showing him the text. He read it, his face impassive. "She's not wrong." He looked out at the bay, where the dark boat was still circling. "They're looking for a diver. They won't be looking for a winch." He nodded toward the boatyard. "The Blue Lantern has a walk-in cold storage unit. Old, barely works. But the door is a foot of insulated steel. No one goes in there. Hide it in plain sight," I whispered, "for now." I nodded, my mind a chaotic whirl of a black card, a phantom Italian accent, and a warning from a cousin 3,000 miles away. The hunt was on, and I was no longer just the retriever. I was the prey. That night, I didn't sleep. I drifted in a state of hyper-aware exhaustion, and when I finally slipped under, I dreamed. I was standing on a beach in a storm, the wind whipping my hair across my face. Pages were swirling around me, ripped from a book, the ink running in the salty spray. I was trying to catch them, to read them, but they were always just out of my grasp, and I could hear a sound. Over the roar of the sea and the wind, it was the sound of tearing paper, not the sharp snap of plastic, but the soft, fibrous rip of a turning page, of a story being irrevocably changed. In his room at the Tidebone Hotel, Silas Caravello opened a small, leather-bound notebook. He wrote his first entry on Nora Valen, his penmanship neat and precise. She chose freedom when the price was uncertainty. He wrote, "That means she'll choose the truth when she's cornered." In her office at the IIC, Rhea Calder hit a wall, a literal, bureaucratic wall. Her request for surveillance assets in Arclight Bay had been denied. More than denied. It had been flagged and buried. A notification popped up on her screen. Jurisdiction on all financial inquiries related to Vesper Syndicate activities had been transferred, effective immediately, to a different agency, an agency she'd never heard of, the Bureau of Tactical Revenues. There was no director listed, no contact number, just a seal. She smelled a rat, a very powerful, well-placed rat. Out on the bay, the tide was turning. The dark motorboat had finally gone. Deacon's workboat was gone. The taco truck was gone. All that was left was the vast, silent darkness of the water. And in the middle of it, bobbing under the cold, indifferent stars, was a single point of turquoise light, a beacon, a target, a promise, a threat. And all the unseen eyes in the night were pointed directly at it. The cold hit me first. Not the clean, biting cold of a winter morning, but a dead, damp chill that clung to the air in the Blue Lantern storage locker. It was the cold of a morgue. The safe sat in the middle of the concrete floor, a block of dark iron slick with condensation. It smelled of brine and rust, the ghosts of its time on the ocean floor. Deacon and I gripped it on either side, our knuckles white. He gave me a sharp nod, and we heaved. The dead weight was a shock, a solid anchor of trouble in our hands. We muscled it onto a heavy-duty dolly and rolled it through the sleeping boatyard, our footsteps echoing off the hulls of dry-dock ships. Our ride was a beat-up refrigerated truck Deacon used for hauling bait, anonymous, functional, perfect. We slid the safe into the chilled, empty cargo bay, the metal door closing with a heavy, final-sounding thud. The plan was simple. Move it to a more secure, long-term hiding place Deacon knew about in the hills. The execution was anything but... I was 3 blocks from the waterfront, heading up the Bay Road, when I saw it. 2 pinpricks of light in my rearview mirror, closing too fast. They resolved into the blunt, aggressive grille of a black SUV. It had no markings, but its windows were tinted to an impenetrable, menacing black. It wasn't a casual tail. It was a predator. "We've got a friend," I said, my voice tight. Deacon just grunted, his eyes fixed on the passenger side mirror. "He's not friendly." They stayed on us, a constant, looming presence. I took a sharp right, then a left. Testing, they mirrored every move perfectly. They were professionals. My mind raced through the options. We couldn't outrun them on the open road. The truck was too slow, too heavy. We needed a different kind of terrain, an equalizer. "Hold on," I said, and cranked the wheel hard, right, tires screaming in protest. We lurched off the smooth asphalt and onto a crumbling service road. The entrance marked by a faded sign, Wharf 9 Terminal, do not enter. Wharf 9 wasn't a terminal anymore. It was a graveyard, a sprawling, 10-acre maze of shipping containers, mountains of scrap metal, and derelict machinery. It was where I'd learned to drive a stick shift at 16 in a junker my dad had bought for $50, weaving through the rust and ruin. I knew its every dead end and hidden path. The SUV followed, its suspension handling the broken pavement better than ours. I plunged into the labyrinth, cutting between stacks of containers that rose like canyon walls, blocking out the morning sun. I could hear the roar of their engine, sometimes close, sometimes distant, as they tried to cut me off. This was my turf. Then a new player entered the game. A sleek, dark sedan appeared at the far end of a long corridor of containers, coming from the opposite direction, effectively blocking my best escape route. For a terrifying second, I thought they had us boxed in, but the sedan just sat there, waiting, watching. I saw the man in the driver's seat. It was him, the man from the pier, the one with the depth gauge eyes and the ghost of an accent. Silas. The name came to me. Unbidden. It felt like his name. I didn't have time to process it. The SUV was closing again. I saw a flash from its passenger window. A fiery orange streak arced through the air. A flare. It slammed into the side of our truck's cargo bay with a loud thwack. The metal skin glowed cherry red for a moment, but the refrigerated truck's thick insulation held. It didn't penetrate. They were trying to cook us out, or cook whatever was inside. I was running out of maze. Ahead of me was a sheer drop-off, a steep slope of shredded metal and debris that slid directly into the murky waters of the bay. A dead end. I stomped on the brakes, then yanked the handbrake. The heavy truck groaned, its back end sliding out in a controlled drift that brought us parallel to the precipice, inches from the edge. The smell of burning rubber filled the cab. Now I yelled. Deacon was already moving. He kicked his door open and hit the ground rolling. He came up with a pneumatic line launcher, a tool we used for salvage, and fired. A 4-pronged grappling hook shot out, trailing a thin, high-tensile cable. It snagged the SUV's front axle. Before they could react, I slammed the truck into reverse. The engine screamed, the wheels spinning, smoking, fighting for purchase. The cable went taut. The SUV, caught off guard, was dragged forward, its tires screeching as the driver fought for control. That's when the man in the sedan, Silas, finally moved. He got out of his car, not with a weapon drawn, but with a strange, deliberate calm. He took off his leather jacket, folded it neatly, and placed it on the hood of his car. He looked toward a nearby stack of containers and gave a small, sharp shake of his head, a signal. Then he walked into the no-man's land between our truck and the SUV, his hands held out to his sides, palms open. "That's enough!" he called out, his voice cutting through the engine noise. It wasn't a plea. It was a command. The doors of the SUV flew open, but the men who got out weren't thugs. They were dressed in tactical gear, clean and professional, with identical emblems on their sleeves, a stylized BTR. The man in the lead was sharp-featured, with an arrogant smirk. Casper Leong. The name came from the same unknown place as Silas's. He ignored Silas and strode toward me, holding up a document. Casper Leong, Bureau of Tactical Revenues, by federal authority. I'm seizing this vehicle and its contents. He flashed the paper. It looked official, embossed with a seal. My blood ran cold, but a ghost whispered in my ear. Adam's ghost. He'd been a cold man, but he'd taught me things, always read the fine print. Nora, the devil is in the details, and so is the lie. I scanned the page. My eyes snagged on a single word in the legalese: conveyance. Except it wasn't. The O and the N were capitalized: conveyance. A deliberate typo, a nullifier, a way for a document to look official to the uninformed while being legally worthless, protecting the issuer from charges of impersonating a federal officer. It was a loophole, a dirty trick. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. It felt like Adam's smile. I looked Casper Leong straight in the eye. "Looks like just another piece of paper someone wants me to sign," I said, my voice dripping with 5 years of venom. I took the warrant from his stunned fingers and, with a sharp, satisfying rip, tore it in half. "I'm done with those." His face hardened into a mask of fury. But before he could speak, a sound split the air. Not a gunshot, a flat, vicious crack. Something screamed past my head. Silas moved with impossible speed. He lunged, grabbing my arm and yanking me down behind the engine block of the truck. A split second later, a second crack echoed through the scrapyard, and a fist-sized chunk of steel exploded from the pillar right where my head had been. A sniper. On the roof of a warehouse across the yard. Casper's face was a mask of shock, then dawning realization. He'd been set up, too. The sniper wasn't his, or maybe he was, and the target had just been expanded. Casper had brought a knife to a gunfight he hadn't even known was happening. Deacon acted. He grabbed a CO2 fire extinguisher from the truck's cab and blasted it at the SUV. A thick, white cloud of freezing fog erupted, instantly obscuring everything. It was chaos. The bridge, Deacon yelled. Through the swirling white smoke, I saw Silas looking at me. Then at the safe in the back of the truck. He understood. There was a narrow, rusted steel maintenance bridge 100 feet away that crossed a deep drainage canal. It was our only way out on foot. He didn't wait for an answer. He moved to the back of the truck as I did. Together, we grabbed the corners of the freezing, heavy safe. On 3, he grunted. We lifted, our arms straining, and half ran, half stumbled through the dissipating fog. The bridge rattled and groaned under our combined weight and the dead weight of the safe. Bullets sparked off the steel girders around us. We made it to the other side and collapsed into the cover of another pile of scrap, our lungs burning. I looked down at his hand, still gripping the corner of the safe next to mine. It was warm and steady. His grip was firm, not crushing, a simple physical fact of strength and presence. And I hated it. I hated this sudden, unwilling reliance on a stranger. But even more than that, I hated the small, treacherous part of me that registered the feeling of his hand next to mine and felt, for the first time in a very long time, a flicker of something that felt terrifyingly like safety. The place Deacon led us to was an old boatwright's shed, long abandoned. The air inside was thick and sweet with the smell of pine resin and curing wood, a scent so clean and honest it felt like a lie in our current situation. We set the safe down on a floor of wide, worn planks. The silence that fell between us was heavy, broken only by the sound of our own ragged breathing and the distant cry of a gull. "We need to open it," I said, looking at the frozen dial. "We need to know what we're risking our necks for." Silas stood by the shed's single grimy window, a silhouette against the gray afternoon light. Knowing might be the bigger risk. "I'm not hauling this thing around on a guess," I shot back, my voice sharper than I intended. I ran a hand over the safe's cold, damp surface. "I'm opening it. I just need to get through the lock." "Let my people handle it. They can have it open in minutes, quietly." A familiar, bitter taste rose in my throat, the echo of Adam's voice, always so reasonable, always so certain he knew the better way. "Let me handle it, Nora. You're too emotional to see this clearly." I shook my head, the motion sharp and final. "No, no one else touches it. This is my find, my risk. I'll be the one to open the door." My life was no longer a place where men got to turn the keys for me. Silas turned from the window, and for the first time, I saw him clearly in the dusty light. He wasn't just watching me. He was studying me. His gaze intense. "This isn't just a door. Nora, if this is what I think it is, it's a tomb. Or a throne." He took a step closer, his voice dropping. There's a reason people are willing to use military-grade hardware to find it. The safe might contain something called the Breyer Ledger. It's a complete record of my father's business. Bank codes, shipping routes, offshore accounts, and a list. A list of names connected to events I was blamed for. Names of men I need to hold accountable to clean the slate, to make my organization legitimate. He said it so plainly, as if he were discussing a quarterly report, an organization. He made it sound so clean, so corporate. I knew it wasn't, yet there was something in his eyes, not regret, but a deep, weary resolve. He wasn't just a predator. He was a man trapped in his own cage, looking for a key. As he spoke, I noticed it, a stiffness in the way he held his left shoulder. He kept his arm close to his side, a subtle, almost imperceptible tension in his posture. When he had pulled me away from the sniper's bullet, he had twisted, shielding my body with his own. The impact hadn't been direct, but the ricochet of steel fragments must have hit him. "You're hurt," I said. "It wasn't a question." He glanced at his shoulder as if just remembering the injury. "It's nothing." "Let me see." I moved toward him, my hands automatically going into a mode I hadn't used in years, the quiet, focused calm of fixing what was broken. He didn't protest. He just watched me, his gaze unwavering, as I gently eased the fabric of his shirt away from his shoulder. A dark, ugly bruise was already blooming across his skin. A violent purple and blue map of the impact. A few small, bloody cuts wept through the discoloration. He had taken the hit that was meant for me. The shed had a small, forgotten first aid kit mounted on the wall. I found antiseptic wipes and a roll of gauze. The space between us shrank as I worked, until I could feel the heat radiating from his skin and hear the soft, controlled sound of his breathing. The world narrowed to the task at hand, cleaning the wounds, applying the bandage. My fingers were steady, but I was acutely aware of the hard muscle under his skin, of the faint scent of leather and something else, something uniquely his. I was touching him, and it was a choice. Every movement was deliberate, slow. This moment, I decided, would have the speed of my own choosing. When I finished, my hand lingered on his shoulder for a beat too long. He didn't move. Neither of us spoke. I could feel his pulse, a steady, strong rhythm beneath my palm. I looked up and met his eyes. The air grew thick, charged with everything we weren't saying. The chaos of the scrapyard, the shared weight of the safe, the silent acknowledgement of the debt I now owed him. Slowly, I let my other hand come up, not to touch his face, but to rest on his chest, right over his heart. It was a barricade and an invitation all at once, a way to keep him at a distance while feeling the very engine of him. I could feel his heartbeat quicken slightly under my palm. This was my pace, my control. He leaned in, his movement so gradual it was almost imperceptible. He was giving me every possible chance to pull away. When his lips finally met mine, it was impossibly gentle. It wasn't a kiss of passion or demand, but one of profound, quiet questioning. It was a request for access, an ask for permission. I didn't pull away. I answered his question by softening, by allowing the contact. His hand came up to gently cup my jaw, his thumb stroking my skin, a silent conversation passing between us. It wasn't a conquest. It was a treaty. I was the one who broke it, pulling back just enough to see his eyes. The connection was still there, a live wire humming between us. But the world outside this shed, the world of guns and lies, was rushing back in. I had to know. This couldn't just be a moment out of time. It had to be anchored to the truth. "If you open that safe," I asked, my voice barely a whisper, "and the truth inside doesn't save you, if it doesn't clear your name, would you still want it?" He didn't hesitate. His eyes were dark and serious, holding a depth I was only just beginning to understand. "I want the truth," he said, his voice raw with conviction, "even if it burns me down." And I believed him. A sharp, sudden knock on the shed door shattered the spell. We sprang apart. Nora Deacon's voice was low and urgent from the other side. We have a problem. The BTR isn't just looking anymore. They're setting up a perimeter. They've got a port-wide containment order. Nothing gets in or out. My mind snapped back into focus. They were closing the net. We couldn't stay here. And we couldn't move the safe by land. We go back to the water, I said, thinking fast. It's the one place they won't expect. The old ferry terminal. Underneath, the support arches are a maze. Arch number 3 has a backflow, a natural siphon. The current pulls things in and holds them there. I can stash the safe. Secure it where no one will find it unless they know exactly where to look. Silas was already processing it, his mind shifting from the intimacy of our moment to the cold, hard lines of strategy. He nodded once. A diversion. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folding knife. It was beautiful, the handle inlaid with dark, polished wood. He pressed a small button, and the blade snapped open with a soft, lethal click. Engraved on the silver bolster was a single, "Perfect Morning Glory. It's called Cantarella," he said. "Offering it to me, handle first, in case you have to cut away." I looked from the blade to his eyes. The double meaning hung in the air between us. Cutting a line, cutting a tie, cutting myself free. I took the knife. Its weight was balanced, perfect in my hand. A small, sad smile touched my lips. "I've cut away before," I said. He nodded, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. "I know. I'll need an hour," I said, already planning the dive, maybe more. "There's a place," he said. "The Vesper Room, on Mast Alley behind Dock 12. No sign on the door. Be there at 3 in the morning. Use the back entrance." The Vesper Room, Ria's black card, the Morning Glory. The pieces clicked into place with a horrifying, exhilarating clarity. He was Vesper. I just nodded, tucking the knife into my belt. There was nothing else to say. We had a plan and a rendezvous. The chill in the archives of the Arclight Maritime Museum was a different kind of cold from the ocean. It was a dry, sterile cold that smelled of brittle paper and preservation chemicals. Ria stood between 2 massive, rolling shelves of nautical charts, a ghost from my past wearing a much better suit. The years had sharpened her, honing the soft edges of her face into a series of determined, professional angles. "This is bigger than your divorce. Nora," she said, her voice a low, clipped whisper that didn't carry in the dead air. She spread a printout on a metal table between us. It was a flow chart of corporate ownership, a web of lies on a single sheet of paper. This company, Argent Petrels Limited, is a shell. It's a ghost ship, a name on paper that does nothing but move money. We followed the wire transfers. They all lead to one place, Bastion State Bank. My eyes traced the lines, the arrows pointing from one anonymous box to the next. It was a language I didn't speak, but I could feel the malice in its grammar. "And the Bureau of Tactical Revenues?" I asked. "Casper Leong." A humorless smile touched Ria's lips. "The BTR is Casper's private army. Funded by the bank, he's their dirty little secret. The man they call when a debt needs collecting and they don't want to get their hands messy. Our intel suggests he's been using them to run his own side deals, creating a ledger of his own. He doesn't just want the Breyer ledger to give to his bosses. He wants it to erase his own name from the pages, to wipe his own blood debt clean before they decide he's a liability." I leaned against the cold steel of a shelf, the enormity of it settling over me. I had pulled a single loose thread, and now an entire criminal tapestry was unraveling at my feet. "Why tell me this, Ria? Why meet me in a freezer full of maps?" She looked at me, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of the cousin I used to know in her tired, intelligent eyes, a hint of a shared history, of a bond that went deeper than shell corporations and federal agencies. "Because you're the one standing in the middle of it," she said, her voice softening almost imperceptibly. "And because you're my family, you once tore up a result to escape the wrong man. Nora, I get that. I respect it. Just don't, in your rush to be free, tear up the wrong page that could save a lot of right people." She folded the chart and slipped it into her blazer. The half-reconciliation was over. The agent was back. "I can't protect you officially. My hands are tied, but I can give you information. Be smart." She walked away, her heels clicking softly on the concrete floor, leaving me alone in the cold with the ghosts of dead sailors and the weight of her words. The Vesper room was a pocket of silence in the noisy heart of the port. The back door in Mast Alley was unmarked, a slab of heavy, dark wood that opened into a world of amber light and shadows. The air smelled of old leather, spilled whiskey, and the faint, sweet scent of clove. There were no windows, no clocks. It was a place outside of time. Silas was waiting in a booth in the far corner, a glass of water untouched in front of him, in the dim, warm light. The exhaustion was plain on his face, etched in the fine lines around his eyes, as I slid onto the leather banquette opposite him. His second in command, a man with the scarred, watchful face of a hawk, gave a slight nod and melted back into the shadows by the bar. We were alone. "Your cousin is a formidable woman," Silas said, his voice a low rumble. He had already pieced it together. Of course he had. "She thinks you're the wrong man, too," I replied, my voice cool. "Maybe I am, and he didn't deny it. He just held my gaze. But I'm the only man who can end this. My father, Alessio Caravello, built an empire on shadows and fear. But he had a line. 10 years ago, a group of financiers, the men behind Bastion State Bank, wanted to use his shipping lanes for their own. Much dirtier work. Casper Leong was their enforcer even then. My father refused their deal. He was killed in a boating accident a month later. The official story is that I consolidated power by removing my father's loyalists in the purge that followed. The truth is, the purge was orchestrated by Leong and his backers to eliminate anyone who knew about their offer. The Briar Ledger proves it. It contains my father's notes on their proposal. It will prove Vesper had nothing to do with those killings. He paused, a muscle tightening in his jaw. "Cassio, my man at the bar, he just found a tracking chip on a legitimate shipment of medical supplies from one of my warehouses. The signal traces back to a vehicle parked 2 blocks from my hotel. There's a rat in my house, working for the bank, for Leong. They're boxing me in from all sides." I listened, absorbing the details, the betrayals, the history written in blood. He was laying his entire world bare for me, not as a confession, but as a statement of fact, a balance sheet of his own. "You want to turn a crime syndicate into a legitimate company," I said, just like that. "Not just like that," he corrected softly. "Painfully, slowly. By cutting out the rot, I want to build a real port authority, a logistics network that protects the people who work here instead of preying on them." The image of a long-ago dive flashed in my mind, unbidden. A call about a submerged fishing boat. It wasn't fishing tackle I'd found in the flooded hold. It was people, men and women who had paid their life savings to be smuggled across the sea, only to be abandoned and sunk when a patrol boat got too close. I remembered surfacing, the taste of salt and bile in my mouth. I remembered the dust of dried salt on their still eyelids, like the sweat of the dead. "I've pulled bodies out of this bay. Silas," I said, my voice thick with the memory. "People who were nothing more than a number on a shipping manifest. They were written off as collateral damage on some balance sheet that men like Casper Leong and Bastion State Bank used to justify their profits. I hate that kind of math." He didn't look away. He didn't flinch. He just watched me, his dark eyes filled with a deep, quiet understanding. In that moment, the space between us wasn't about Vesper or the IIC or the violence that clung to his name. It was about 2 people who had seen the ugly truth of the world from different sides of the same dirty water and had both come away hating it. Trust and attraction are a dangerous cocktail. He leaned forward slightly, and the carefully constructed space between us collapsed. His chest brushed against mine, a fleeting, electric contact. I didn't pull back. I could hear his heartbeat, a steady, strong rhythm that faltered for just a second, a slight arrhythmia caused by the pain in his shoulder. Without thinking, I reached up and gently touched his face. my thumb tracing the line of his jaw. Then I leaned in and rested my forehead against his. I closed my eyes. The world went away. There was only the warmth of his skin, the soft sound of his breathing, and the solid, reassuring presence of him. This was a truth my body understood better than my mind. He was dangerous. Yes. But here, in this pocket of silence, he felt like the only safe harbor in the storm. His hand came up and covered mine, which was still resting on his chest. He didn't pull it away. He didn't trap it there. He just held it, his fingers lacing through mine, a silent gesture of support. I squeezed his hand gently, a response, a signature. This was our contract, written without paper or ink. We would see this through, together. A discreet buzz from the phone I'd left on the table broke the spell. It was a text from Deacon. Package is secure in Arch 3. Siphons holding it tight. Signal is live. Only we know the frequency. I showed the screen to Silas. He nodded, a weight lifting from his shoulders. At least one thing had gone right. But then my phone buzzed again. This time it was Rhea. BTR just got a statewide warrant, full tactical. Casper's hitting every known Vesper asset at dawn. He's not looking for the safe anymore. He's coming for you. Dawn. We had hours. Silas stood up, his face grim. The commander back in control. I can get you out of the city. There's a storm drain tunnel that runs from the old cannery to the highway. Bypasses all the port checkpoints. Cassio can take you. You'll be gone before they even know you're missing. He was offering me an escape, the same choice I had made 5 years ago, to run, to save myself and leave the mess behind. I looked at him, at this complicated, dangerous man who wanted to build something clean from the wreckage of his father's legacy. I thought of Rhea's words, about not tearing up the wrong page. I thought of the bodies in the water. I was done running. I was done letting other people sign for my life, and I was done letting them tear it up. Either. I stood up to face him, my decision as solid and clear as a piece of sea glass. No, I said, my voice quiet but unshakable. We go together. 4:12 a.m. The time blinked on the small digital clock behind the bar, a silent, damning number. In the Vesper room's timeless amber glow, it felt like a betrayal. That's when the world ended. It didn't start with a bang, but with a sudden, absolute darkness. The power was cut, plunging the room into a blackness so complete it felt like a physical weight. A heartbeat of pure silence followed, and then the sound of shattering glass. Not one window, but all of them. A violent, percussive symphony of destruction. Bright, stabbing beams of tactical flashlights cut through the darkness, pinning us in their glare like cornered animals. A voice, amplified and distorted by a bullhorn, blasted through the broken windows. This is the Bureau of Tactical Revenues. We have a federal warrant. Exit with your hands in the air. Hand over the document. It was Casper Leong. Beside him, silhouetted in the doorway, stood another man in a suit, holding a briefcase like a shield. Evan Root, the fake prosecutor, the official face of the lie. Before I could even process the shock, Silas moved. He reached under the table and his hand came back with a small, flat, black device. He pressed a button on its side. A faint, high-pitched whine filled the air for a single second, and then nothing. Wraith fog is active, he said, his voice a calm, anchoring presence in the chaos. They have no communications for 180 seconds. Go, now. Rhea and Deacon were already on their feet, their faces grim masks in the strobing flashlight beams. The roof, I said, pointing toward a service ladder I'd spotted earlier behind the bar. There's a salt warehouse 2 buildings down. We can get across. We moved as one unit, a desperate, cobbled-together team. Cassio and his men were already engaging the BTR agents flooding into the room, not with weapons, but with disorientation. I saw the blinding flash of a stun grenade, heard the choked coughs as a cloud of fine pepper powder filled the front of the room. They weren't fighting to win. They were fighting for seconds on the clock. The ladder was cold and slick in my hands. Rhea went first, then Deacon, then me. The air on the roof was sharp and cold, tasting of salt and impending rain. The warehouse roof was 30 feet away, across a chasm of dark alleyway. Deacon was already there. Having shimmied across a thick bundle of utility cables, he secured a line and sent the harness sliding back. Rhea clipped in and went, a dark shape against the pre-dawn sky. It was my turn. I clipped in, took a deep breath, and pushed off. The journey across was a terrifying, soaring blur. I landed hard on the graveled roof of the warehouse, my hands scraping against the rough surface to break my fall. I felt a sharp, stinging pain and looked down to see my palms bleeding, the red mixing with the gray grit. Silas landed beside me a moment later, as silent as a shadow. He saw my hands. Without a word, he pulled a clean, white handkerchief from his pocket and pressed it into my palm. He held it there for a second, his grip firm, his hand warm over mine. The fabric soaked up the blood, the salt from the roof stinging the open wounds, for that one moment. With the shouts and chaos echoing from below, our hands were joined, a strange communion of salt, sweat, and blood. "They're not just hitting this place," Deacon said, his voice a low growl. He was looking down at the docks. "They're moving on the water." My blood ran cold. I saw them. A BTR tactical boat, fast and gray, heading directly for the old ferry terminal, directly for arch number 3. Casper wasn't stupid. He was cutting off our escape route and going for the prize at the same time. "He knows," I breathed, or he guessed. There was no time, no other option. I have to go. I ran to the edge of the roof, looking for a way down. Silas grabbed my arm. "Nora, wait. We can find another way." "There is no other way," I said, looking him straight in the eye. "He gets that safe. We lose." Before he could argue, before I could second-guess myself, I jumped. It was a 20-foot drop to a lower tier of the pier, and I landed badly. My knees jarring, a shock of pain shooting up my spine, but I was on my feet and running. I heard Silas curse my name from the roof above, but I didn't look back. I hit the water in a shallow dive, the shock of the cold so intense it drove the air from my lungs. It was a physical blow, a fist of ice clenching around my chest. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. Then training took over. I forced a slow exhale, found a rhythm, and kicked down into the absolute blackness beneath the pier. I didn't need a light. I swam by touch, my bare hands tracing the rough, barnacle-encrusted surfaces of the massive concrete support pillars. I felt for the familiar crack in the cement near the base of the third arch, my only landmark in this sightless world. Back on the pier, the two worlds collided. Silas landed on the dock just as Casper Leong and 2 of his men rounded the corner. They faced each other under the single, buzzing sodium lamp. "You're out of moves. Caravello," Casper sneered, his gun leveled. "The woman, the safe. It's all over." "You're still living in my father's world, Casper," Silas replied, his voice dangerously calm as he circled slowly. "You're still playing by his dirty rules. That dirty legacy paid for your pretty suits. And now I'm burying it." Silas moved. It was a blur of motion. He closed the distance in 2 quick steps, deflecting Casper's gun arm upwards. The shot went wild, blasting a chunk out of the pier's wooden canopy. Silas's other hand chopped down on Casper's wrist, and the gun clattered to the ground. He followed with a knee to the gut and an elbow to the jaw. It was brutal, efficient, and shockingly fast. Casper stumbled back, gasping. Silas kicked the fallen gun away, scooped it up, and worked the action, ejecting the magazine. He didn't shoot. He simply disarmed a threat. Beneath the surface, I found the safe. The BTR divers were already here, their powerful lights cutting through the gloom, their torch already sparking against the steel cage Deacon had built around the siphon. I was out of time. I pulled the cantarella knife. The blade gleamed for a second in the distant light. I sliced through the decoy line, freeing the marker buoy. Then, with all my strength, I pushed the safe out of the main current of the siphon and into the eddy that curled around into the neighboring archway. Arch number 7. I pulled the new beacon from my belt, a small disc Silas had given me. I pressed the activation stud twice. It was keyed to my biometrics, pulsing at the exact frequency of my own heartbeat. I wedged it into the safe's handle and kicked away, back into the darkness. Just as I cleared the arch, a deep, rumbling boom shuddered through the water. It wasn't a massive explosion, just a contained, powerful concussion. I saw the BTR divers get thrown about like dolls as a huge slab of the concrete pier above them gave way, collapsing into the water in a churning cloud of white foam and debris, sealing the entrance to Arch 3. Deacon's little surprise. Above, the sudden roar of sirens split the air. Not BTR sirens, these were the high-low wail of the Arclight Port Police. Casper's head snapped up, his face a mask of disbelief. On a rooftop 3 buildings away. Rhea closed her laptop. The fake officer in distress call routed through a BTR server and broadcast on the Port Police frequency. Had worked. Casper was suddenly in the middle of a jurisdictional nightmare, his unsanctioned raid now contaminated by a legitimate law enforcement agency. He had no choice but to pull back. I surfaced near the Blue Lantern, gasping, my body shaking uncontrollably from the cold and adrenaline. Deacon was there, pulling me from the water. Silas and Rhea arrived moments later, their faces grim. We were alive. We had the safe. We had won the battle. We regrouped in the dark, quiet workshop, the smell of sawdust and turpentine, a welcome relief from the acrid salt and cordite of the docks. "Everyone's out," Silas said into his own comms unit, a small, discreet earpiece, rendezvous at the secondary point. He paused, listening. A frown creased his forehead. He tapped the earpiece. "Cassio report." Silence. He tried again. "Cassio, what's your status? Acknowledge." The silence that answered was heavier, more final than any explosion. It was the sound of a voice that should have been there, and wasn't. Silas's face went pale under the single bare bulb of the workshop. The mole in his house had a name, and now he had Cassio. The quiet in the Blue Lantern workshop was louder than the earlier gunfire. It was a vacuum, a void where Cassio's voice should have been. Silas stood frozen, his hand still on his earpiece, a statue of dawning horror. And then we found him. He was in the main workshop, strapped to a heavy wooden chair with thick zip ties. His face was bruised, a trickle of blood dried at the corner of his mouth. But his eyes were open, burning with a furious, helpless shame. Standing over him wasn't a BTR agent or a stranger. It was a man I recognized from the Vesper room, one of Silas's own guards. He held a pistol, and his hand was shaking. The bank made a better offer. "Silas," the man said, his voice cracking, "a retirement plan. Orders came straight from the top, from Evan Root." The fake prosecutor, the clean man with the briefcase. Rhea, who'd been silently working on her laptop in the corner, looked up. "It makes sense," she said, her voice a cold, analytical blade. "Bastion State Bank isn't the head of the snake. It's just one of the fangs. It's managed by a consortium, a private equity cabal. My sources call them the Caligo Circle." She turned the laptop screen toward us. It showed a complex web of offshore holdings and interlocking directorates. They're a shadow syndicate of financiers. They fund everything. They backed your father, Silas, and when he wouldn't play ball, they created and funded the BTR as a competitor, a check on his power. They've been playing both sides for a decade, controlling the entire West Coast shipping game. They don't care who wins, as long as they own the board. All eyes turned back to Cassio. This wasn't just a simple betrayal for money. It was something deeper. Why? Cassio Silas's voice was hollow, stripped of all authority, leaving only the raw pain of a man stabbed in the back by his own brother. Cassio's glare shifted from his captor to Silas. "You went soft," he rasped, his voice rough. "All this talk of legitimacy, cleaning the slate. What do you think this business is? You think you can wash it clean and there will still be a place for men like me? The bankers, the lawyers, they'll run it all. We were wolves. Silas, you wanted to turn us into sheepdogs." I saw it then. In the desperation in his eyes, it wasn't greed, it was fear. The profound, terrifying fear of being made obsolete. He was a man built for the old world, for the dirty rules, and he was terrified that in Silas's clean new world, he would be a relic, a ghost with no purpose. He hadn't betrayed Silas for a paycheck. He'd done it to stop the clock, to keep the world he understood from vanishing. Silas stared at Cassio, a long, silent moment passing between them. The traitorous guard tensed, his gun wavering between Silas and his prisoner. Then Silas did something I never expected. He walked forward past the gun and knelt in front of Cassio. He pulled the cantarella knife from his belt. My knife! I realized with a jolt and with two quick, precise movements, sliced through the zip ties on Cassio's wrists. He stood up and stepped back, leaving Cassio free but surrounded. You have a choice. Old friend, Silas said, his voice regaining its quiet strength. Stay. Take the risk with me, that there's a place for wolves in the new world, or walk out that door and go live with the bankers. Take your retirement plan. Cassio rubbed his wrists, his eyes darting from Silas to the traitor, then to the gun the man still held. Slowly, deliberately. He reached inside his own jacket and pulled out his pistol. The tension in the room became unbearable, a physical pressure on my chest. He turned the gun, not toward Silas, but toward the guard who had tied him up. He held it there for a long, agonizing second. Then, with a sound that was half sigh, half growl, he lowered it. He didn't drop it. He tossed it onto a nearby workbench, where it landed with a heavy, metallic clatter. I never did like compound interest, he muttered. The tide was turning. I could feel it in the air, a subtle shift in the wind coming off the bay. The safe, I said, my voice, cutting through the tense silence. If I'm going to get it, it has to be now. The current under the ferry terminal will shift in an hour. It'll be 10 times harder to get it out. I looked at Silas. I need you topside, on the winch. You're the only one besides Deacon I'd trust as an anchor. We stood on the deck of the Triton, Deacon's small workboat, the gentle rocking of familiar comfort under my feet. The others were back in the workshop, dealing with the traitor, planning our next move, up here. There was only the sound of water lapping against the hull and the vast, dark quiet of the bay. My biggest fear, I said, looking out at the dark water, not at him, isn't the BTR. It's not getting shot at or being trapped underwater. I paused, the confession feeling heavy and strange on my tongue. It's having to trust someone again, really trust them. With my life. He was silent for a long time. Standing beside me at the railing, I could feel his gaze on me. Mine, he said finally, his voice a low murmur that was almost lost in the breeze, is trusting too little and dying alone. The simple, stark honesty of it hit me harder than any bullet. We were the same. 2 solitary islands separated by a lifetime of different circumstances, now staring across the same dark, lonely water. I turned to face him. The moment felt fragile. A thin sheet of glass that could shatter with a wrong word, a wrong move. I reached out, my hand hesitating for a moment before I gently placed my fingers on the side of his neck, feeling for the strong, steady pulse of his artery. It was a clinical gesture, a diver checking a partner's vitals, but it was also the most intimate thing I had done in years. His pulse was a steady, reassuring rhythm under my skin, his life, right there at my fingertips. He didn't move, he just watched me, his dark eyes searching my face. His own hand came up, not to grab me, not to pull me closer, but to rest lightly on my hip. It was a question, a point of contact, waiting for a response. I held my breath, and for a second, I thought I would pull away, retreat back to the safety of my own island. But then I did something else. I leaned into his touch, a small, almost imperceptible shift of my weight, and then I pulled him closer. That was all the answer he needed. His other arm came around me, drawing me against him. The kiss, when it came, was nothing like the first one in the boat shed. That had been a question, a spark in the dark. This was the answer. It was deep and sure, a slow, consuming heat that started in my chest and spread through my entire body. It was a surrender, not to him, but to the trust I had been so terrified of. His leather jacket, still cool from the night air, fell from his shoulders and pooled on the wooden deck. The world narrowed to the sensations of the moment, the rough texture of his shirt under my hands, the rhythmic slap of waves against the hull, the sweet, clean smell of pine resin from the boatyard mingling with the salt of the sea. His hands moved from my waist to my back, holding me, anchoring me. Every touch was a statement, a confirmation. It was a slow, deliberate exploration, a mapping of new territory built on a foundation of shared danger and whispered fears. It was the furthest thing from the cold, clinical life I had left behind. This was messy and real and terrifyingly alive. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. The night was quiet again. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. We simply stood there, wrapped in each other's arms, the shared warmth a bulwark against the cold. After a long moment, we sank down to the deck, our backs against the wheelhouse, shoulders touching. Deacon had left a couple of foil-wrapped sandwiches on the seat. I unwrapped one and broke it in half, handing a piece to him. We ate in a comfortable, easy silence, the cheap white bread and cold turkey tasting like the best meal I'd ever had. A small, genuine smile touched my lips. "Diver's romance," I said quietly. He looked at me, a corresponding smile in his eyes. I could get used to it. The buzz of my phone on the deck beside me was a harsh, ugly intrusion, an unknown number. I almost ignored it, but a knot of dread tightened in my stomach. I picked it up. It was a text message. "Bring the safe to the Obsidian Ferry Pier. Midnight, come alone, or he won't survive." Beneath the words was a video file. I tapped it with a trembling finger. The video was short, shaky, and poorly lit. It showed Deacon, his hands bound, a strip of duct tape over his mouth. He was being held in what looked like a storage container. One of Casper's men stepped into the frame, held up a hand, and the video ended. I felt the blood drain from my face. Silas saw my expression and was instantly alert. I showed him the phone. I watched his hand resting on his knee, slowly clench into a white-knuckled fist. The brief peace, the fragile warmth we had built was shattered. They hadn't just declared war. They had taken my family. My decision was instant, forged in a cold, white-hot rage. I looked from the phone to Silas, my gaze hard and clear. "We end it there," I said, my voice devoid of any fear, any hesitation. For good. The rage that had flared up in me at the sight of Deacon's captured face didn't burn out. It cooled, hardening into something dense and sharp, a tool I could use. We didn't have time for fear or doubt. We had a deadline, written in the language of a threat against my family. The workshop at the Blue Lantern, which had felt like a sanctuary just an hour before, became a command center. The air, thick with the smell of sawdust, was now electric with the frantic, focused energy of a plan coming together. Rhea was the architect. She stood over a workbench, her usual cool demeanor supercharged with a high-voltage intensity. "They're expecting a handover on the pier," she said, her fingers flying across her laptop keyboard. "So, we'll give them one. Deacon has an old, busted safe in the back of his truck. Same model as the Ledger's. We fill it with scrap metal to match the weight, but we add something else." She held up a small, sealed bag of fine, dark gray powder, highly magnetic graphite, undetectable to the naked eye, but any scanner they use to verify the contents will scream. It'll confirm their suspicions, make them think they have the real thing. It'll hold their attention. "And the real ledger?" Silas asked, his voice a low rumble. Rhea looked at me. "The real ledger goes where they'll never look. You're a diver, Nora. Your gear is your life. No one questions a diver's equipment. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. We would dismantle one of my spare oxygen tanks, a smaller pony bottle, and nestle the real prize, the slim, titanium tube containing the ledger inside, surrounded by sound-dampening foam. To anyone else, it would be just another piece of life-saving equipment hanging from my harness. The perfect deception. While Rhea and Deacon worked on the tanks, Cassio took charge of the human element. He'd already dealt with the traitor, who was now bound and gagged in the cold storage locker, awaiting a very different kind of debriefing. Cassio gathered the handful of men who hadn't been compromised, the ones whose loyalty had been tested by fire and found true. I watched as he handed each man a small, heavy token, a coin stamped with the Vesper morning glory. "Look at it," he commanded, his voice rough but clear. "Memorize it." He then held up his own. "Now turn it over." On the back of his was a tiny, almost invisible maker's mark, a sequence of 7 small scratches next to the stem of the flower. "Anyone who approaches you tonight claiming to be one of us won't have this mark. If they don't have the scratches, they are not your brother. You know what to do." It was a simple, brutal, and effective test. The house was being cleaned. Silas, meanwhile, worked his own logistics. He made a single, brief call. "I need a vessel," he said, his voice low and authoritative, an old harbor tug, the Lucky 7. "Have it moored at the north end of the Obsidian Pier by 11 p.m. No questions." He hung up. He looked at me, and a flicker of understanding passed between us. L7. Lucky 7, the number of the arch where I had hidden the safe. It was a message, a small acknowledgement of our shared secret, a piece of trust in a world of lies. My own preparations were a ritual, a familiar catechism of survival. In the quiet of my loft, I laid out my gear. I checked the seals on my dry suit, the charge on my dive computer, the battery in my headlamp. I flexed the blade of the Cantarella knife, its morning glory emblem a cool, solid weight in my palm. It was his, but it felt like mine now. Finally. I took 2 chemical heat packs and taped them to the inside of my wrists. It was an old diver's trick to keep circulation in your hands, to keep your fingers from going numb and clumsy in the crushing cold of the deep. It was a habit born of professionalism, a small act of control in a situation that was spiraling into chaos. As the final hour approached, Rhea made her own move. She made a call to a secure line at the IIC. "This is Calder," she said, her voice devoid of emotion. "I'm invoking a slow burn protocol. I have unconfirmed intel about unsanctioned tactical operations at the Arclight Port Authority. Send a query to the port police. Flag it low priority. I want it to get lost in the bureaucratic shuffle for at least an hour before it lands on the right desk." It was a beautiful piece of strategy, a delayed fuse. She was intentionally leaking just enough information to ensure that when the real chaos started, the port police would arrive, not as a direct response to us, but as a response to a BTR team operating illegally in their jurisdiction. She was building Casper a trap out of his own red tape. Just before we left, Silas pulled me aside. The frantic energy of the last few hours had subsided, leaving a heavy, quiet tension in its place. He pressed a folded piece of paper into my hand. It was a handwritten letter. "If I fall tonight," he said, his voice so low I could barely hear it, "get this to my younger brother, Lorenzo. The contact information is inside. Tell him. Tell him not to let Vesper go back to the dark. Tell him to finish what I started." I looked down at the letter, at this small, fragile admission of his own mortality. I thought of the divorce papers I had signed, a document that had felt like an ending. This felt like the same kind of surrender to fate, and a cold fury rose in me. I was done with endings dictated by other men. I pushed the letter back into his hand. "No," I said, my voice fierce, unshakable. He looked at me, surprised. "You won't fall. I won't let you." I took a breath, the words coming from a place of certainty I didn't know I possessed. 5 years ago, I signed a piece of paper that ended my life. I'm not doing that again. Tonight, we're not ending anything. Tonight, we re-sign our lives, on our own terms. His eyes searched mine, and in their dark depths, I saw a flicker of something that looked like hope. He slowly closed his hand around the letter and nodded. The obsidian ferry pier was a skeleton picked clean by time and neglect. The few remaining lights cast a sickly, greenish-blue glow, the color of old hospitals and bad dreams. The water below was unnaturally calm, a sheet of black glass that promised a storm beneath its placid surface. The air was still, heavy, waiting. They were there, just as the text had promised. Casper Leong stood in the center of the pier, flanked by a dozen BTR agents in full tactical gear. Evan Root was beside him, looking smug and untouchable. But my eyes were drawn to the woman who stood slightly behind them. She was impeccably dressed, her smile as thin and sharp as a paper cut. This had to be Mara Levant, the face of Bastion State Bank. She was the true queen on this chessboard. "Mr. Caravello," she said, her voice smooth and pleasant, a sound that made the hairs on my arms stand up. "Let's dispense with the theatrics, the ledger for the lives of your people. A simple transaction." Silas stepped forward, playing his part. "My man is valuable," he said, his voice a low drawl. "Buying time. I need proof of life, a confirmation that he's unharmed." It was the signal. While all eyes were on Silas and Mora, I slipped away into the shadows at the edge of the pier. High above, on the rusted superstructure of the old ferry terminal, a small, dark shape moved. It was Rhea, a miniature camera in her hand. She was planting our witness, the unblinking eye that would broadcast the truth to the world when the time was right. I reached the edge of the pier, my gear heavy on my back, the modified pony bottle containing the real ledger a cold, heavy weight against my side. I looked at the black water. My heart was a steady, heavy drum in my chest. This was it, the final plunge. As if on cue, a sharp, distinct vibration pulsed against my wrist. My dive watch, the preset alarm. It was midnight. It was time. I slipped into the black water without a sound, a ghost returning to its element. The world above, the sickly lights, the tense voices, the weight of a life in the balance vanished, replaced by the cold, silent press of the deep. This was my world, a place of pressure and instinct. I swam beneath the immense, rotting structure of the ferry terminal, a cathedral of rust and decay. Giant, seaweed-choked gears from the old loading mechanisms loomed out of the darkness like the bones of forgotten leviathans. I navigated them by memory and touch, my fingers tracing the familiar lines of decay. I found arch number 7. The current was stronger here, a ghost of the siphon's pull from 4 arches down. The safe was exactly where I'd left it, wedged securely in a concrete crevice. Working quickly, my fingers already starting to feel the bite of the cold despite my gloves. I unclipped the modified pony bottle from my harness. The real work began. The container for the ledger wasn't locked with a key or a code. Silas had designed it with a kinetic lock, keyed to a specific rhythm. My rhythm. I placed my thumb on the release valve and tapped, a quiet, steady rhythm that matched the beat of my own heart. Tap, 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 tap. There was a soft, hydraulic hiss, and the end cap unlocked. I slid the slim, watertight titanium tube out, the Briar ledger. It felt impossibly heavy. On the pier, the fragile truce was breaking. I could feel the vibrations through the water, the dull thuds of a conflict beginning. Mara Levant gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod to a man positioned on the far gantry, a sniper, Casper Leong, who'd been standing with the tense arrogance of a man in charge, saw it too. A flicker of cold. Dawning horror crossed his face as he finally understood. He wasn't a partner in this. He was a disposable tool, a loose end about to be tied off. He spun, his own pistol coming up, aimed directly at Mara. "You won't kill me after you have the book," he snarled, his voice a desperate rasp. Mara's paper-thin smile didn't waver. "Oh, Casper," she said, her voice laced with a chilling, genuine pity. "You know me so little." She raised her hand. "Fire on both of them. Leave no one." Chaos erupted. The BTR agents, loyal to Mara's money, turned their weapons not just on Silas's men, but on Casper's as well. The pier became a shooting gallery. Silas reacted instantly. He shoved Rhea, who had been documenting everything from the shadows, behind a stack of thick metal pallets. He activated the second wraith fog device, but this wasn't like the first one. This time, the smoke that billowed out was laced with a fine, aerosolized metallic dust, a glittering, almost invisible shimmer that clung to the BTR agent's tactical gear, a tag for the infrared cameras that Ria's slow telegram would eventually bring to the party. From the other end of the pier, Cassio opened up, not with lethal force, but with suppressive fire, his shot strategically hitting the metal girders above the sniper, sending a shower of sparks and rust down on him, ruining his aim. Silas used the diversion, moving low and fast through the glittering fog. He didn't go for a weapon, he went for Casper. He tackled him, not as an enemy but as a liability, pulling him out of the line of fire. They rolled across the wet concrete, a tangle of limbs. Silas came up on top, but instead of a finishing blow, he grabbed a thick mooring rope from a cleat and efficiently hogtied the stunned and disbelieving Casper. Beneath the surface, I was in my own fight. As I secured the ledger and began my ascent, a trailing piece of old fishing net, heavy and thick as a python, snagged on my tank valve. I was caught. I twisted, trying to pull free, but my movements only tightened the net's grip. Panic, cold and sharp, tried to rise in my throat, but I forced it down. I fumbled for the canarella, my numb fingers struggling to get a grip. The blade felt clumsy in my hand as I began to saw at the thick, stubborn ropes, my own air supply bubbling away, each silver sphere a ticking second off the clock. Suddenly, a powerful beam of a dive light cut through the darkness. A dark shape descended toward me. For a heart-stopping moment, I thought it was a BTR diver. But then I saw his face. Deacon. His eyes were wide with urgency behind his mask. He must have broken free. Of course he had. They had wanted him as a live hostage, a lure, and that had been their mistake. He didn't waste time. He produced a line with a clip and attached it to my harness. He gave me a sharp, upward jerk, and the emergency ascent began. We broke the surface right next to piling number 12, the designated false pier, 100 yards from the main firefight, above us, on the gantry. Ria saw us. She gave a sharp nod and hit a key on her laptop. The live stream went active. I ripped the regulator from my mouth. "My name is Nora Valen," I yelled, my voice raw, projecting across the water. I held up the titanium tube, and this is the Briar Ledger. With trembling, frozen fingers, I unsealed the tube and pulled out the slim, waterproof book. I opened it to a page I had marked in my mind from Silas's description. On this page, an entry dated October 10th, a wire transfer of $5 million from Bastion State Bank to a BTR holding account, described as security retainer. The authorization signature belongs to Evan Root. Mara Levant heard me. She saw the camera's small, red recording light blinking on the gantry above. She understood. The game wasn't just lost, it was being broadcast to the world. Her composure finally cracked. She screamed an order to a man on a small, fast boat idling nearby. Blow it all. The boat sped toward the base of the pier, a kamikaze run to destroy the evidence, to destroy us all. I saw the flash. Silas saw it too. He moved with a speed that seemed to defy physics, launching himself across the deck. He hit me a second before the shockwave did, his body a solid, living shield, wrapping around me, pulling me down, absorbing the brutal, concussive force of the blast. The world became a deafening roar and a wave of pressure that felt like it would tear me apart. We were thrown across the deck. The last thing I felt was his arms tightening around me, an unspoken, instinctive vow of protection that was louder than any explosion. And then, the sirens, dozens of them, the port police, the local news vans, the IIC tactical team Ria's delayed fuse had finally burned down. The pier was flooded with red and blue flashing lights, cutting through the swirling, glittering dust of the wraith fog, turning the chaotic scene into a surreal, sparkling snow globe of justice. Mara, her face a mask of pure fury, raised a small pistol she'd had hidden, aiming it at Silas's back as he lay over me. but before she could fire, a figure stumbled into her line of sight. Casper. He looked from Mara's face to Silas, who was still shielding me, and in that moment, he made his choice. He stood between her and Silas. The shot cracked, and Casper grunted, a line of red blossoming across his shoulder. He looked at Silas, a strange, grim expression of respect on his face, and gave a single, sharp nod. "I chose to risk it with you," he gasped, before collapsing. It was over. Mara was swarmed by IAC agents. Evan Root was caught trying to torch his briefcase, but Rhea already had a digital copy of everything. The BTR, its authority and its crimes exposed on a live feed, was dismantled on the spot. I slowly got to my feet, Silas's arms still around me, and looked at the chaos, at the flashing lights, at the end of a long, dark chapter. My voice, when I spoke, was quiet but clear, a final declaration for the whole world to hear. No one gets to sign for anyone else's life anymore. The weeks that followed were quiet. The Arclight Bay winds blew the last of the glittering dust out to sea, and a calm settled over the port. The Briar Ledger became the property of the federal courts, its secrets laid bare. The Vesper Syndicate died, and from its ashes rose Vesper Coastworks, a fully licensed and legitimate port security firm, operating under the watchful and now friendly oversight of the IIC. I didn't go back to the deep. I opened a small bookstore and cafe right next to the Blue Lantern boatyard. I called it Salt and Steel. It had a quiet reading corner reserved for the off-duty fishermen and boatwrights. On a shelf behind the counter, the empty titanium tube that once held the ledger now serves as a makeshift vase for a single, thriving morning glory vine. Rhea got her promotion. Deacon, now a local hero, started a free weekend class teaching rescue diving skills to the kids on the port, and Cassio, after serving a suspended sentence for his role in the affair, became the head of internal security for the new Vesper Coastworks. His fierce loyalty finally pointed in the right direction. One quiet evening, Silas and I stood on the shore, watching the tide roll in. The air was clean and salty. He reached out and gently touched his forehead to mine, a gesture that had become our language. His lips found mine, a slow, easy kiss that tasted of the sea. He pressed a small, silver key into my palm. It was intricately carved, shaped like a morning glory. "It's not to lock you in," he said, his voice a soft murmur against the sound of the waves. "It's to open anything you want." I looked from the key to his eyes, and I smiled. I laced my fingers through his, my hand closing around his in a grip that was both strong and sure. "From now on," I said, "we sign together, on our own blank page." Thank you so much for listening to this story. I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from, so please drop a comment below to say hello and share your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, Mafia Boss Stories, and if you enjoyed this journey, please like the video and hit that hype button to help more people discover it.